This is Rose Spidell with the Washington State Governor's Office of the Education Ombuds. I'm one of the Senior Education Ombuds, and I'm delighted to welcome today Mary Fertakis. She's going to engage with us around social emotional learning and racial equity. We have another one of our team members here, Stephanie Palmquist, who will be helping out. I am going to just give a very quick overview of social emotional learning and our involvement at OEO with some work that's happening statewide around developing state level standards or guidelines on social emotional learning. Just briefly, social emotional learning, I'm going to let Mary go into the details of what that is, but our state has been engaging in conversation around this for at least the last few years formally. The state legislature tasked OSPI with coming up with recommendations around social emotional learning benchmarks. There was a report that came out that's available that gives some initial framing of it and recommendations for further work, including looking really closely at issues of equity and cultural responsiveness and universal design. That work was then, again, supported by the legislature, and the work group was tasked to go forth and develop even more detailed indicators around what the social emotional skills might look like for students as they progress through the K-12 grades. So that work is ongoing right now. We were just having a subcommittee call this morning, and we will be continuing conversations around how to make sure that as we develop and articulate what social emotional learning means and encompasses in Washington State, that we're really thoughtful and intentional about making sure that not only does it not unintentionally reinforce biases that are in our system now, but it can be a tool to tackle those and reduce opportunity gaps for students. The first work group in the report really called out and highlighted the key to cultural responsiveness, recognizing that there's a reflection of culture in any selection and implementation of standards, and it requires us to be thoughtful and responsive to the many different cultures of the students, families, educators, and staff that make up school communities. And recognizing that every person, including teachers, principals, and district leaders, brings a cultural perspective in the way they interact with others. And so just being very explicit and thoughtful about this, and Mary's conversation today will guide us through some, again, what are social emotional learning skills and how to ensure that we're infusing equity in their development. So I am going to turn it over to you, Mary. Please let us know again if you want to give an overview of what we're aiming to accomplish and walk us through social emotional learning and equity.
Great. Thank you so much, both Rose and Stephanie. We just had a few learner outcomes just so that it would be clear to everyone what we're going to be doing today. Just a very brief introduction of me. I was a 22-year school board director in the Tukwila School District until this last November when I stepped down. And Tukwila has been named at one point in time the most ethnically diverse school district in the country as an immigrant refugee resettlement area. So issues of social emotional learning and equity are very near and dear to my heart because we are working with so many different students coming from many different backgrounds and situations, and the issues that are so important for them to be successful go back to the R's, which are relationships with their teachers and other positive adults, the relevance of the curriculum, do they see themselves, can they connect with it, and so the relationship, the relevance, and the respect. All of us want and want respect when we're working with each other, and that is a mutual piece, showing respect to those working with them and those working with them showing respect. So we're going to be refreshing and understanding on the difference between equity and educational equity, and what equal is, what exactly is the understanding is of social emotional learning principles, and how social emotional learning and equity are very much intertwined. And this also was taken from the report that Rose referenced, that we have 6 standards that have been worked on very hard by the task force and with the definitions with them. So I'm going to go through that quickly. Also, this is what I want to make sure we're starting with a common understanding that the difference between equality, which means you're getting the same amount of resources, attention, and supports, versus equity, which is what you're getting what you need in the way of resources, attention, and support. So it's personalized, and then making it very specific to educational equity when we're looking at every student getting what they need at the right moment in their education, regardless of race, gender, ethnicity, language, ability, family background, or family income. And so when we're talking about equity in the educational setting, this is really the definition that we're working with. So what is social emotional learning? It has these 5 levels, which you can actually see when you're looking at teaching. It correlates to when we're looking at preschool, kindergarten, and self-management and behavior and moving it through. So it is scaffolded, and you can see why it is possible to be having social emotional learning principles and activities starting at a very young age with our children. So within those core competencies, there are 5 different things that are being looked for, and the questions that one asks in order to get them there are, what are my thoughts and feelings? When we're looking at self-awareness, what causes these thoughts and feelings, and how can I express them respectfully? On self-management, you can see the bullet points on the side. These are the character traits and what is being worked on in this particular piece of self-management, and then the questions that you try to internalize in working with students are, what different responses can I have to an event? How can I respond to an event as constructively as possible? And how can I better understand other people's thoughts and feelings? This development of empathy, which is really key to any kind of effective social emotional learning. The social awareness is one that we are very much aware of in our highly diverse state, and that is becoming even more and more diverse with us being an immigrant refugee resettlement area with a number of people coming in, and just the demographic shift that is taking place in our state as well as around the country. So the social awareness piece is something that we really need to be working on, because this is where we start getting into implicit bias and our prejudices that we have with people. So on the left side, you see the different elements that we're concerned about, and then the questions that we would want to be asking and having students internalize are, how can I better understand why people think and feel the way they do? This is going back to everyone has a story. And when we understand people's stories, we can be a lot more empathetic to where they're coming from. And then the second question, how can I adjust my actions so that my interactions with different people turn out well? The next elements are relationship skills, and this is critical for, and it feeds into a lot of the soft skills that are talked about and what we want students to be able to do, and our young scholars. Communicate clearly, be able to listen well, be able to communicate with others, dealing with inappropriate social pressure, negotiating conflict constructively, seeking and acting and offering help when needed. All of these, as a part of social emotional learning, are important because as adults, we are working with lots of different people, and this is something that carries through into adulthood, and these are things that our students and our scholars absolutely need to be able to do well because of the environments they'll then be working in. So you can see the 4 elements on the left with communication, social engagement, relationship building, and teamwork. Like I said, you should recognize those from some of the focuses we've had at the foci in this state on coming from the business community and what they want to see students be able to do when they come into the workforce. So how can I communicate my expectations to other people? How can I communicate with other people to understand and manage their expectations of me? This is actually really good. These are good skills for all of us to have because it talks about boundaries also, and working on positive interpersonal relationships. The responsible decision making. See again on the left side the elements that are involved with this, and again going back to some of the skills that we continue to hear that our workforce development folks want our students to have: problem solving, being able to analyze things, how to evaluate, how to be reflective, and then this piece of ethical responsibility, which is really important as you're working your way through, so that we don't have things like situational ethics. So here's the questions. What consequences will my actions have on myself and others? How do my choices align with my values? And how can I solve problems creatively? All of these, again, really important skills, not just for our scholars, but also for us as adults. So there's an awful lot of research that has shown the benefits of social emotional learning. And they can, when you're talking about a school setting, you're looking at improved attitudes and behaviors with classroom behavior management. There's a decrease in dropout rates. It absolutely affects mental health issues. That we've seen decreases in substance abuse and decreases in misconduct. They have better relationships overall with their peers, families, and adults. And it allows our staff to spend more time on teaching and learning and less time on classroom management, because you're working as a team and there's an understanding in the classroom of how we're going to be working together and the standards that we have for each other. And we absolutely see that there's going to be an increase in their academic performance, graduation rates, whatever they want to do as a post-secondary choice, and then their employment rates and their average wages and their employability, as well as their ability to maintain jobs goes up when you've got positive social emotional learning principles embedded. So using these practices to address disproportionality, this is one of the reasons why this has come up as an issue that we're starting to look at when we talk about the whole child in education, is that, and I just pulled a couple of data points to make the point about this. And so looking at suspensions and expulsions, looking at the Federal Civil Rights Data Center, we've got as a national average, Black students 16% of the K-12 population, but they're between 32 and 42% of suspended students compared to the white students. And then when we look at Washington State, the most recent data I could get was the 2016-17 school year. Our Black students are 4.4% of our K-12 population, and they are suspended at twice that rate. And our Latinx students, 22.8, almost 23, 26%, and then our white students, you can see their data too. The thing that should be disturbing as you're going down to the next bullet is the preschool suspensions. And again, this is federal data, which is a couple of years behind. The most recent I could access was 2013-14. With Black children is 19% of preschoolers, but 47% of total suspensions. So everybody should be taking a look at this and what is going on here, and why in the world are we suspending preschoolers to begin with and at these rates. There's also some significant data related to experiencing trauma, which relates to higher dropout and incarceration rates. And you can see the Washington State data for Blacks being not 3.98, almost 4% of the overall population, but a little over 18% of incarcerated adults. So these are very real data points, and there are a whole lot. You can go through health disparities, you can go through workforce, you can go through housing, you can go through all the different sectors and see these disparities, and there are absolutely ties to social emotional well-being. But for purposes of time, I just picked out a couple to illustrate the point at the federal and the Washington State level. So going through some of the causes of toxic stress and complex trauma, you can see a pretty big list here. And the ones that are in italics are ones that can be related to equity issues. And you could probably make the case that all of these could be, but the ones that are highlighted have actually been able to show through data disparity points what these are. So these are all things that are impacting a significant number of the children that come to us every day in the K-12 system. Why is this important? Because these are the effects that the trauma has. If you are concerned about where you're going to be sleeping that night, or if you're going to have a meal, your concentration isn't going to be on academics, it's going to be on having basic needs met. And that just reflects itself all the way through. When you're focused on survival, your world shrinks. And so forming relationships, if you know that you're going to be moving a lot, that is impacted. If you're focused again on some of meeting your basic needs, you're not going to necessarily be prioritizing what's happening in the classroom and all the rules and expectations that are being put on our students. So trauma-informed practices is a term that you've probably started to hear more, and this is based on training that is now happening for our staff to understand and respond to what is happening with our students. And this is these are really key points that professional development as a resource allocation is really important to understand. It's going from thinking that this child does not like you, and so they're just trying to do things to make you unhappy or upset or angry, to understanding that this is not occurring by choice. It is being triggered by other things that are impacting them outside of the school environment, and if it's then compounded by not having good relationships and bullying or other things that could be happening in school, you're going to be having issues. And it is important to understand that, again, this is not a choice, but there is suffering and pain going on, and understanding and having that relationship with our students and understanding the process of this is going to have a huge impact on how well they do in school and what's happening in classrooms and on the playgrounds. This prioritizes treatment over punishment. Doesn't mean that discipline isn't happening, but instead of the knee-jerk reaction of just giving a referral to the office, it's figuring out how you can help students be successful by helping them regulate their emotions, creating environments where they feel safe. That sense of safety is really important, and we can see what's going on nationally, and just this last weekend with all the students and our youth out protesting for gun control, that they don't feel safe. And if you don't feel safe, it's very hard to focus on academics. You're thinking about, how do I stay safe? What are things I need to be aware of in my surroundings that could potentially be unsafe? So there are a lot of different things that you can do. There's some examples of practices and programs that are used in this state in different school districts and around the country. This is also important to understand, the term vicarious trauma or secondary trauma, because our staff, not just teachers, but everyone who interacts with our students, when you know their stories and you know what's happening, you also can become traumatized by that. And so this is also a really important concept for us to be aware of, that we need to be showing concern for our teachers and providing them with self-care principles and practices as a part of their professional development. And there's a couple of resources here at the end of this slideshow. There's actually several resource slides for you. I just happened to put this one in here with the Trauma Smart, but there are a number of things that you'll be able to access. So the intersection of equity and social emotional learning, this has been very interesting to be looking at, because there's a huge body of research related to social emotional learning, but not a whole lot related to equity and how they intersect. But the two are absolutely related, because remember, our definition of equity is providing what they need and making it individualized, not treating people equally. So here were the two of the definitions I gave you at the beginning, and this one on the far right, we're now intersecting social emotional learning. This is what students receiving what they need to develop their full academic and social potential, regardless of all these other issues and factors that they may be dealing with. So a foundational piece of this is how our students see themselves. And this is how they see themselves. Do I have agency? Am I being heard? Am I safe? All of these things and other factors are going to impact how their school experience is and how much they are then wanting to develop relationships with others. It's taking into account everything: our culture, our race, our gender, our class, our sexual identity, language. It runs the gamut. It's who our students are. And then the situatedness piece is important because we've traditionally in our school system have we've got barriers that have been put in there that are institutional, that are structural, that are related to race and privilege and a long history of segregation in our schools, where our schools are located, where people live, lots of national policies and state policies. All of this contributes to where students feel that they are situated related to opportunity and access. So the mindset, this is a critical piece for our staff to understand about students. And one of the things that's important is when we're working with our families is in building that relationship, not just with the students, but also with their parents and guardians and the extended family. They are their child's first teacher. And having a meeting with them at the beginning of the school year before anything happens can set a foundation for a positive relationship, so that when that phone call is coming in, it's not automatically, they're against my child, because, and let's not forget that some of our families also did not have positive experiences when they were in school, and there's going to be some projection potentially on, if I had a bad experience and this happened to me, this might be happening to my child too. And of course, we want to have the best for our children, and it's not at all an unusual position to be in where there'd be defensiveness that's going on. But when you can develop that relationship and work as partners with your for the success of the child, that starts to change things, and it also then impacts a student's belief about their learning and capacity. If they're hearing it both from school and at home, you can do this, and I support you, and we're going to give you the supports that you need to be successful, that absolutely has an impact on them. This issue of having a sense of belonging. There's a reason why extended learning opportunities before school, after school, summer school, weekend, clubs, sports, all of these different things contribute to a sense of belonging to your community. And then there's that develops a desire to want to continue to be there and be a positive member, and to be able to continue being a part of the group. Do they believe their effort is going to lead to something, and that success is possible, and that their work has value to them? And this goes back to that R of relevance in our curriculum. Do they see themselves in it? Is it connecting to the things that are important to them? That sense of belonging is confirmed by different levels of and types of research studies that have been going on for a number of years. This first one is a very interesting one about when students believe that their teachers respect them. Trust increases, misbehavior decreases, and resulting in lower suspensions. This study had a 30-minute empathy exercise as a professional development training for staff, and the results showed that the teachers who were in the control group who did not have that versus the teachers who did showed that their students were going to be half as likely to be suspended by the end of the school year. And it was really important to note that the strong effects for Black and Latino boys who had been suspended. So again, 30 minutes of a professional development related to developing empathy had that kind of an impact in the schools that were in the Stanford study. Our students are very, very perceptive, and they know when our words and our actions are not in alignment, and when they see unfairness. They might, as the younger they are, they might use the word unfair as opposed to inequitable. Or inconsistency, but they absolutely notice it when it's happening. And you will start to see this really start to manifest in the middle school years as they become so much more aware of their surroundings. And so this translation into inconsistent treatment, which can be through discipline issues, things that are said in classes, expectations for our students. This lowers the level of trust. When our students are picking up negative stereotypes, and they do pick up, there are a lot of microaggressions that are said, and this is not just race related. It can be gender, it can be sexual identity, it can be related to ability or disability. And when those negative stereotypes are out there, and it's often because people don't really realize what they're saying, it does affect our kids. And we don't want them to be having what's called confirmation bias, that these messages they're hearing outside of school, inside of school, saying that they are less than or less capable, they take that and internalize it, and that has a negative effect on their social emotional well-being. What can counter that is, again, a caring adult, and there's an entire theory and process around what a warm demander is, which is I'm not going to have low expectations for you. I'm going to push you, but I'm also going to give you supports that you need, and I know that you can do this. And our students, all of us, respond well when we have someone who's has that role of the warm demander in our life. Other studies related to cultural backgrounds that emphasize interdependence and community. This is an important thing for us to understand as we have more and more children from around the world coming into our schools, where our focus here in our system is traditionally has been individual effort and individual success. But it's what we need to have is an understanding that for many cultures, it's not the success of the individual that is important, it's the success of the community and how you contribute to that. So an example would be, we found out in our district that we had a stronger effect for students and seeing themselves in different roles when we shifted from saying, you would be a great doctor, to saying, if you decide to go into the medical field, think of what you could do to contribute to your community and what a positive impact that would be. So it's still encouraging the student to go in that direction, but taking into account that within their different cultures, it's how it's going to help the community is important. These are several suggestions from a teacher of color looking at instruction through a social emotional lens. And these are, there's some really great suggestions, and that take some personal work also. For those of us who are white, like myself, I have a lot of work I need to do to understand that I've been deeply socially programmed into a white dominant culture. And so there's a lot of reading that I have been doing, and lots of conversations with my colleagues of color, doing things like taking the Harvard implicit bias test, which I strongly recommend. You don't have to share it with anyone, but it gives you a good sense of where you are and where areas are to increase your awareness to be doing this personal work. It has to be, again, meaningful and relevant. We can't be imposing a particular set of values and beliefs that are based on a white, Western, and individualistic perspective. And I just gave you an example of just the slight shift you need to make to incorporate where people are coming from in a community-based or communal-based culture. And we want to be careful in trying to do these things, that we are not unintentionally sending messages to students that they are inferior for just being who they are. There's also some work that we need to do, and we can't do this unless we develop our own awareness of some of these issues, is navigating between home and school, and recognizing that our kids are going back and forth between expectations within their own home and culture and the expectations at school. So being able to intentionally know what is going on and do that type of code switching related to the way we communicate or particular types of behavior, helping them know that within, not saying one is better than the other, but within particular contexts, this is the way that it's done for you to be successful. The building relationships, again, you're going to just see this over and over and over again, because this is the foundation to what needs to happen. And it's not just with our students, it's with the families and the extended community. We want to have this sense of connectedness with everybody working together to be supporting the students in our different realms and the different resources that we have. And it's recognizing the value of different cultures and community when we're looking at what people bring to a conversation from an asset perspective instead of what often happens, which is a deficit perspective. So here's some questions. If you're going to be looking at implementing any type of a social emotional learning program or instruction, that just these things have to be addressed, and there's some planning and resource allocation and training that needs to take place in order for this to happen. Dropping a curriculum in and saying do this is not necessarily going to be effective, but unfortunately a lot of times that's what happens. So there's other things that need to happen going on in tandem. Looking at what type of and the overall piece of this too is to try and look at it not as an add-on, but just the way we do business, that this is an embedded piece of how we are teaching children, because we're looking at the whole child, not just their academic success, because their academic success absolutely is impacted by their mindset and how well they're feeling in the social emotional domains. So is it being taught, is what you're offering being taught in a culturally responsive manner? Well, you don't know that unless you've had culturally responsive training. Does it allow for different variations in responses, because children will hear things differently going through the filter of their own cultural or family background? Are students being positioned as the problem instead of implicit bias or stereotype? And this is, again, the shift from instead of saying what's wrong with you to what's going on, what's happening, and can we talk about it? A slight shift, but again, it's not positioning the kids as the problem. Many times our children are just in these circumstances that they don't have control over, whether it be homelessness or a domestic violence situation or name it, food insecurity. They're trying to maneuver through this also. And so an understanding of that is really important, and they are not the problem in these situations. Has social emotional learning is it being introduced into your buildings without changing curricular behavior or policies that have institutionalized the problems that we're already having? So like I said, there are multiple levels of this that are happening at the building level, at the policy making level with your school board, at the budget level, because this is not going to happen if you don't have budget allocations. And the reminder that people need to have is that our budget is a reflection of our values. So what we fund is what we value. And that is a legitimate question to be asking in your school districts and how that is being developed. And have all your staff, not just your teachers, receive training in social emotional learning principles and trauma-informed professional development. The first people a student often sees in the morning is the bus driver. So have they had some of this training also? A child may be at the bus stop having come from a traumatizing situation in their home. It may be impacting their behavior on the bus. So again, having an understanding of this is important. So how do you measure this? And this is a brief guide, and I've given you the link to this on one of the resources slides. I think it's important to note that in all of the state plans from all 50 states that were submitted to the federal government under ESSA, not a single one has included a measurement for social emotional learning, even though they've had the option to include what they want as one of the indicators. So one of the things that came up was that people were saying it was difficult to measure what it is. Well, in fact, when we're doing some intentional planning and thinking this through, you really can measure the impacts of social emotional learning. So when you're looking at it from a place of student need, on the front end, are you intervening early before problems arise? That would be a trauma-informed approach. Are you using early warning systems, which is the data we're collecting on things like discipline and attendance and grades? And are you intervening then once the problems have been detected? Two different approaches, but you can tie it back to a social emotional focus. On your program improvement, what's happening with your priority setting? Are you focusing efforts based on your student's current status? Or are you looking and evaluating, we instituted this program or we're implementing this, were the efforts effective and successful, and how are we assessing that? And then the accountability piece, this is something we all need to be engaged in. In order to do this, there does need to be a way to get additional support. And it's not unheard of that your state legislature would actually allocate resources to do this. The state of Massachusetts is implementing and has allocated funding for social emotional learning, and so now funds are available for the districts in that state to be investing in the type of training their staff need. So what to measure and how? So this is giving you an idea of, again, thinking through, looking at your district's strategic plan, what's going to be impacting long-term outcomes for students. Absolutely, investing in social emotional learning is going to do that because this is cumulative. If they have a positive mindset, if they know they're around caring adults, if they know that they are heard, if they know that they're valued and they are given the supports that they need, absolutely this impacts their long-term outcomes. Are they aligning with your social or your local priorities and goals? Again, what do we care about? This is what we fund. It is our values statement. And then looking at areas that are within our power to change. There is a limited authority that school districts have. Their mission is academic, but every school administrator and teacher knows that if a child's coming to school hungry or they've just witnessed an instance of domestic violence, those are external things coming in through the doors that are impacting students' ability to be successful. So looking at where the things are that are within the realm of authority to change, and then also identifying these other factors, a couple of which I've just mentioned, and looking at ways that we can engage with the people in those sectors to say, hey, you've got some policy things going on that are negatively impacting our families. Can we work together to do a better alignment? Because this is impacting their ability to be successful academically. And then we also do have to look at our existing capacities. What structures and resources do we already have in place and that are informing instruction and programming? There are different tools that you can use. You can use surveys. One of the cautions, however, related to surveys are there are some really good parent, student, and staff either culture surveys or perception surveys, district-wide culture surveys, and these can give some really valuable information. But you do have to make sure that the questions that are being asked have been reviewed through an equity lens so that you're getting the information that you actually need. Is it going to be a tool that can provide accurate and timely information and looking for explicit actions that can be taken? We don't want to be talking about this, we want to be doing, because each day that goes by is impacting a lot of children who are sitting in classrooms. How rigorous does it need to be? Making that decision for internal information gathering or high stakes decision making. If it's high stakes decision making, you want to show some caution about using a survey, because just like high stakes testing can be gamed, high stakes surveys can also. And then looking at the practicality, cost is an issue. What kind of training is going to be needed? Are you going to need to have some technology? Are you going to be making sure that the families that tend to be marginalized and aren't able to participate in something like this, how are you intentionally reaching out and ensuring that their voices are being included in these discussions? As a summary, this comes from our state task force, looking at what we're trying to do, and we know that when we can form those relationships, build our social awareness, increasing our social awareness, enhancing our abilities to connect with people, the importance of the diverse perspectives, the incredible range of cultures that are represented in Washington State, which are really an asset for us, the different languages, the stories people have, all of these things contribute to our communities when we recognize them and honor them and give them a place in what we're doing as a part of our daily work in schools. So I think after this, we can go to the next one, but I think it goes into the resource slides. Yeah, so as I mentioned, there are several slides that you can just flip through them, covering all the information that I covered in the prior slides. You can see where I got them from. If there's something that has piqued your interest that you want to know more about, you don't have to go searching for it. It's all on here on these several resource slides that I've provided. So with that, Rose, did you have anything that you wanted to do as a wrap up? And then I'd be happy to open it up for questions for either of us.
Sure. I just thank you so much for running us through this and reviewing what are some of those social emotional skills that we're looking at and thinking about, how they really tie into success at school, which is academic, but it's also social and engaging effectively with people at school and outside of it. And thank you for walking us through the equity piece. We did have one question come up, and so if you're open, we'll put this one out there, and then as I read this question to Mary, if there are others who also have questions, please let us know. I do know that one question that's come up is wanting to have access to this PowerPoint that you've put together, Mary, and indeed, we will be sharing it. We post the materials on our website. We'll post the recorded video also as well. We can also send out a copy of the PowerPoint to registrants, or you can look for it on our website, oeo.wa.gov. So one of the questions, and it's an interesting one, I think it comes from the slide that showed some of the data about students of color, Black students being overrepresented in the number of students who receive suspensions or other disciplinary actions. And then in some of the conversations, I think sometimes we use the word underrepresented, and maybe we use that sometimes underrepresented in for example, graduation rates or in receiving opportunities or benefits. There's a question here which is around trying to understand the use of the terms underrepresented and then also overrepresented, and wondering, as we're talking about this in relation to Black and Brown students, are we measuring that against a baseline of white students or white male students? And what do we think about that?
Yeah, when you're talking about over or underrepresentation, if you can see me, I'm just making, here's your circle of your pie chart. And just think of this with whatever your percentage is of white students, Latinx students, Black students, Asian, Native American, 2 or more races, whatever that percentage is in that pie chart, it should be proportionate. If you're talking if you've got 56% of your students are white, then 56% of the discipline referrals should be for white students. If you're talking about identifying students for special education, it should be proportionate to the percentage that's represented. And I pulled just those 2 pieces looking at suspensions and expulsions, but we know for special education that students of color are, particularly our Black students and our Latinx students, and particularly boys, when you look at gender, are being overrepresented in special education. They're being underrepresented, both boys and girls, when we're talking about gifted and talented classes, or in AP, IB, or Cambridge classes, when you're talking about rigorous course work. So this whole thing about under and overrepresented is going back to the actual percentages of students that are in your student demographic, and they should be in alignment across the board for all these different categories. Does that help?
Yeah, I think so. And in one way, it answers that the baseline for some of these questions about under or overrepresented is actually the baseline of how, of the representation in a general population versus necessarily a contrast directly to other student groups. So Mary, we have another good question here. It is almost April, which means summer is basically tomorrow. What books would be helpful to give as a gift for a staff member or other staff to read over the summer to gear up for a focus on this topic next year? Do you have a couple books that you would throw out there?
I have been compiling a list not only of books, but also articles that are equity related, covering different topics and ways and different cultures, looking at, I have a big list. I would be very happy to email that to you. And if you want to post it, I'd be more than happy to share that. I've just been collecting things over time because this is some of the personal reading that I need to do also. I will say, if you're wanting to look at something just as equity as a, to do an introduction, and I'll say this specifically for white people, there is a classic article written by Peggy McIntosh called The Invisible Knapsack. And it's 3 or 4 pages. This was written in 1989, and it is still as relevant today to help people understand basically this privilege that we carry around as an invisible backpack or knapsack of all of these things. And she just lists them out, and it's a really great way to start thinking about it. There are, oh my goodness, I'm just looking at my library behind me. I've just got so many books. You hit on something that I love, is just the personal piece. And the resources that I have here, I mostly focused on articles in here, but like I said, I will be happy to send you a list of books, and I will highlight the ones that would be focused on social emotional.
Excellent. And I will, with regret, try to wrap us up here. We had another shout out for a book called Culturally Responsive Teaching in the Brain by Zaretta Hammond, which is on my reading list as well. Mary, if you would share that list, your bibliography with us, if you would, and we can share that out, that would be great. I know a lot of folks really want to deepen learning around this. We appreciate this. We had a question about whether you would come to someone's district and share your information. So
absolutely.
Mary's
Absolutely.
information is on the slides. So we thank you so much for taking the time to join us. We have some other great questions, like strategies for helping reinforce feelings of safety, and so many things that I'm sure we could talk for another hour, but we've reached the end of our time that we set for today. Mary, do you have words to leave us?
If you would like to send me any of the questions, I would be happy to take some time to respond to them in writing.
Excellent. Thank you. All right. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. We really appreciate it. We are going to post this recording later. You will have access to the slides. And as you heard, Mary will try to respond to some other questions, and her contact information is there for you as well. Thanks, and join us again. We'll be having more webinars as the spring continues.